Do 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 da ba 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 da ba 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 ba.
I don't think we'll get in trouble for that. I think Blue Boss is public domain at this point.
Right. Hopefully. We didn't do it for over a minute, and I also got to be careful when we play our music. We'll get copyright flag, and then I gotta
really on our own.
Yeah, and it's a pain in the butt to deal with, but I can fix it. But it's after the fact.
Gracious.
Right. All right. So let's do the thing. I don't even know what song we're on here. Oh, I see. We're on Astronaut Eyes. That's good. Let's do this. Let's do what we did before. Oh yeah. Welcome to the show. Just getting everything up and running here, guys. Bear with us for a few minutes. We're going to be watching John Vervaake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, Episode 2. Turn that back a little bit. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? If you guys comment, I will be able to see you in a couple minutes once I get things up on my phone as well. So feel free to share your questions or comments. So this one isn't going to have any audio. Everybody go, stay away, baby. 'Cause I don't want to fight you anymore. I just want to explore this infinite place and white. See it evermore. So come on, baby, why? Oh yeah, how long are we in?
Oh no, it's been a minute and 7 seconds.
Sorry,
YouTube,
Facebook, Zuck.
Yeah, Facebook, YouTube, whoever's gonna get us.
Okay, so that part of the video will be muted in some countries. That's okay. We own the rights to this music. We actually wrote this music. This is DJ from American Dharma. I'm Chris. DJ, you're in multiple bands. You're in Infusion.
Infusion.
You're in Imaginary Man. You're in
did a project.
Greater Than One project that you guys did,
which you can find at greaterthanoneband.com, I think, or you can just type in Greater Than One Band, and one of those, the one that's not from the past, like too far in the past, is us. It's, some good stuff with some local musicians in the area that came together to put together.
Who all did you guys get on there?
Oh, Jesse Schulzenberger. He's a local drummer. He also teaches. Fantastic drummer. I can't really remember what projects he's been in. He's been in so many. But yeah, Jesse Schulzenberger. We got Jake Smith, which you know Jake. Fantastic key player and just general musician. Had Mr. James Hash on there. Brandon Lillis. Being trapped in a closet. That smelled really bad because it was, that was the sound booth and something must have died in it.
I think I just cut your sound out for a millisecond there.
I don't know. Yeah, I had a lot of people. Naomi Michelle, myself doing a bunch of different things, pretending like I'm a different thing,
Right.
Making sound effects on a keyboard, simulating war noises, pew pew
Whoa.
pew. Tanks, Cool. Sky is Falling. Great song. Go check it out.
Yeah, and you can check out our music. Here it is right here. This is our new EP, Inmo. You can listen to the whole thing without commercials on Mr. Doom's page here. So check that out on YouTube. It's also on our channel. And if you guys like and subscribe, the band, the podcast helps us so much to reach more people. So we are always grateful for that support and greatly appreciate it. So yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what we did last week. We started this series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, by Professor John Vervaeke out of the University of Toronto, cognitive scientist, psychologist, Buddhist teacher and practitioner, as well as Tai Chi, and so on and so forth. He's quite the Renaissance dude.
Renaissance dude.
Yeah, I had to go for dude, and it's actually one of the most amazing things I've ever found in my life. Not to oversell it, but seriously, this is incredible. What happens throughout the course of this series. It's hard to break it down in a nutshell, but the basic hypothesis is that we are in a meaning crisis as a species right now. We haven't been through something as revolutionary, as massive and fundamental a change in the way that we operate with one another since probably the Axial Revolution during the Bronze Age.
Yeah, and that's
which
not a good
none
sign.
of us remember very well.
That was complete and utter total collapse.
Yeah.
As he'll say later, and this is the closest thing we ever came to apocalypse.
Right.
And if we're anything like that, we're on the brink. But, not being a doomsayer, because how evolution works, you have to have an ultimate challenge to ultimately evolve past it. So we're creating our own challenge.
Yes, and so in the course of this series of lectures, Vervaeke actually offers us not only a hypothesis of what this meaning crisis is, how it came about, how we got to this point of dissolution and breakdown and distrust in all of our prevailing institutions and this and that. He also offers a way that we may awaken over the course of this series of lectures, an awakening from the meaning crisis. So this is a great gift to humanity. No university in the world has 50 lecture series. He wanted this to be for everybody, and it is quite a grand undertaking. It's quite the masterwork. So he put this out over the course of a year, 1 week at a time. And that's what we're going to try and do as well as we go through this and learn together about the meaning crisis and how we may help engender awakening from it. So without further ado, let's get rolling.
Welcome back. I'm John Vervaeke, and this is a video series on awakening from the meaning crisis. So last time we were beginning our historical examination of the origin of this capacity for meaning making to try and get a clearer picture of what it is. And today I'd like to continue on with that. We were talking about the connections between meaning making, enhancing cognition, altered states of consciousness, wisdom. And we were talking about that in connection with the Upper Paleolithic transition, in which human beings seem to have gone through this radical change, which was not so much a biological change, but a change in how they were using their cognition. We talked about important ideas such as cognitive exaptation and psychotechnology. And we talked about how the Upper Paleolithic transition was probably driven by the way shamanism was a set of psychotechnologies for altering states of consciousness to cognitively exact the enhanced abilities that trade rituals and initiation rituals and healing rituals had already been creating. And we talked about the way the shaman engaged in various disruptive strategies to try and alter their framing of reality, because how we frame reality is both the source of our activity, our ability to define patterns, but it is also how we can get locked in, or how we misframe reality and how we are in need of insight. And when we talked about that in connection for something like that, the 9-dot problem. And that led us to realize that there's kinds of knowing that are independent from the knowing that we capture in our statements of our beliefs. There's knowings about knowing how to do something, what it's like to have a particular perspective, and what it's like to know something by identifying with it and participating in it. And I was starting to show you how the shaman's altered state of consciousness was also enhancing and altering meaning making, affording insight, and improving the ability of the shaman to help in hunting and healthcare, two things that would radically improve survival. I want to continue now in talking more about that, more about what's going on in shamanism, in order to get more explication of this meaning-making, wisdom, altered states of consciousness, different kinds of knowing, and how they're all interrelated together. So typically the shaman engages in practices that are putting significant changes in their attention. As we mentioned, there's often significant disruptive strategies: sleep deprivation, sex deprivation, social isolation, the use of psychedelics, extended chanting, all of these, dancing, all of these things are designed to bring about radical changes in the way in which the brain is operating. Now, part of what a shaman is doing is, I would argue, also getting into the flow state. So the flow state has become something that is discussed both academically and in the popular culture. It was made famous in work by Csikszentmihalyi. His book, Flow, The Flow Experience, brought it to the forefront in 1990. So what is the flow experience? So the flow experience is an experience people get into. They often describe it as like being in the zone. So you are involved in a task that is very demanding. In fact, it has a particular structure to it. So these are your skills, and these is how demanding the situation is, right? And the flow state is one in which the demands of the situation just slightly go beyond your skill abilities. Right? And so you can get what's called here, Csikszentmihalyi often represents this by the flow channel. Right? When my skills can just through, we'll talk about this through like sort of insight and restructuring, when I can just enough exact and extend my skills to meet the demands, so I have to put everything I've got into it, then I get into the flow channel. If my skills exceed the demands, I fall into boredom. If my demands exceed the skills, all right, I fall into anxiety. Now, of course, the thing about you is you're very good at learning in situation. So you need a kind of context in which your skills, as your skills improve, your environment also improves. So one of the things we've created in our culture is we have created flow induction machines. Because what those machines have are a situation where your skills are constantly improving and the demands of the environment are constantly improving. And these flow induction machines have other properties that are very important in them. There's a very tight feedback between what you do and how the environment responds. You're getting very clear information, and failure matters. It's like, at least symbolically, because you can die. And of course, some of you are probably realizing that I'm talking about video games. Video games are one of the most reliable ways of inducing the flow state in people. In fact, part of the reasons why video games are addictive, and they now are being considered to be a bona fide addiction by the World Health Organization, is precisely because they engender the flow state. Addictions, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about addictions, addictions run off machinery that is evolutionarily adaptive. That's why it's compelling. So, the flow state. What are other things that people do to get into the flow state? They play jazz. They do martial arts. I'm a martial artist, right? One that's particularly interesting, because there's no other explanation for why people do it other than they get into the flow state, is rock climbing. Because rock climbing otherwise would be like, it's like some sort of torture from Greek mythology, right? You're presented like, here's a rock face. What I want you to do is I want you to go up that. It's going to be really physically demanding. It's going to hurt you. You might fall to you and harm yourself. And once you get to the top, you come back down. It would seem like a torturous thing to do. Well, we know why people rock climb. They rock climb because they get into the flow state. And the flow state is deeply, deeply positive for people. It's not the same thing as physical pleasure, right? In fact, the flow state is much more connected to meaning in life. In fact, the more often you get into the flow state, the more likely you will rate your life as meaningful. The more you will experience well-being. Now, what's interesting also about the flow state, and remember we're doing this because I'm talking about that shamanism is probably a practice for practicing getting into the flow state, so remember that, right? The thing about the flow state, it's a universal. People across cultures, socioeconomic groups, genders, language, environments, age groups, report being able to get into the flow state, and they describe it in detail almost exactly the same way. That's a universal. And universals are important in cognitive science. You pay attention to the universals because they give you profound insight into the machinery. What's it like to be in the flow state? Well, when you're in the flow state, right, you feel like you're deeply at one with things. So for example, I'm a martial artist, and when I'm sparring, it's like my sense of connectedness to my opponent is really enhanced. And I'm really at one. And that comes with it this kind of spontaneity. So when a strike is coming toward, my hand is just there. I don't sort of raise your hand now, John. It flows out of me, hence the word, right? And the block is there. The hockey player, the goalie, just puts out his hand, the glove hand, and the puck is there. There's this tremendous sense of at-one-ment. And then closely allied to it is this, right? At one level, you know, like the shaman dancing or chanting, that there's tremendous metabolic energy at work, effort. You're making, at one level, all this effort, but at another level, it feels effortless. That's this spontaneity. Again, it just seems to flow from you. Your sense of time is passing differently. Your sense of self is being dramatically altered. So when people are in the flow state, right, their a kind of self-consciousness disappears. That self-conscious, you know, we carry around that self-consciousness that's always doing this sort of thing. It's constantly sort of doing our autobiography. How's my day going? How am I doing? Who am I? What am I doing? Blah, blah. And it's also checking. How do I, image management. How do I look? What are people thinking of me? How am I doing? Am I under threat? All of that nattering and, oh, am I failing? I knew, and that, you know, of course, and that can get out of hand. And like when you're in depression, you ruminate on all that stuff and it overwhelms you. But we all carry that burden around. It's taxing. And the thing in the flow state, it's gone. Because there's no space for all of that. Because you're so, right, engrossed in the task. The other thing about the flow state is it's super salient. It's like the kind of brightness and vividness you get in a video game. The world seems more intense. And people really like this experience. And not only do they like it, it seems to be where they do their best work. So the flow experience is an optimal experience in two ways. Many people regard it as the best experiences they can have, but it's also where they're doing their very best at what they want to excel in. That's why it's so motivating to get into the flow state. So, why is the flow state so good? So, this year, 2018, I published some work with Adrian Hera-Bennett and Leo Ferraro, in which we tried to argue for what the cognitive mechanisms are in the flow state. See, Csikszentmihalyi tells you the environmental conditions, what you need in order to get into the flow state. You need skills and demand to be matched. You need there to be very tight coupling between you and the environment, like in the video game. You need very clear information. It can't be ambiguous or vague. And failure has to matter. It has to be costly to you in some fashion. He specified all of that. He also specified the kind of training that helps enhance you get you into the flow state. And think about this. Think about what I said last time, and we're going to explore this more. Training in mindfulness, the more people have training in mindfulness, increases their capacity to get into the flow state. Now, can we come up with a unified explanation for all of this? I think we can. Both for the phenomenology, why we're experiencing what we're experiencing when we're in the flow state, and why is it improving your cognition? And therefore, why would the shaman be enhancing their cognition by getting into something like the flow state through their ritual practices? Okay, so think about the rock climber. Okay? The rock climber is climbing. Remember we talked about how you frame and find patterns last time. Remember the 9-dot problem, right? And that these patterns aren't just patterns in your mind, they're patterns in knowing how to make sense of things. So you're rock climbing, and if that breaks down, you impasse. You're stuck. And I don't mean just cognitively. You're physically stuck. Now, if you want to be a good rock climber, what you have to do is you have to break that framing. You have to train yourself to break the frame, restructure, change what you're finding relevant and salient, and then change yourself to fit that, and then you refit yourself to the rock face. You refit yourself to the rock face. Then you have to do it again. And then you have to do it again. And then you have to do it again. Or the jazz musician. The jazz musician is playing, they pick up on a pattern, they play with it, but they can't stay with it too long. What do they have to do? They have to shift, they have to restructure, they have to shift into a new pattern and then play with that, but they can't stay with it too long. They have to pick up on it, they have to reframe again and again and again and again and again. Do you see what's going on with the rock climber, the jazz musician, the martial artist? Is this idea of a cascade of insights. You're having an insight that's leading to another insight, that's leading to another insight, right? It's priming. So, you know when you have like an insight, you have like, aha, and you get that sort of burst of energy, and it's like a flash. That's why we put a light bulb over somebody's head when we want to show them having an insight. There's like that flash. Now imagine if I took that aha and I extended it. Aha. That's the flow state. It's an insight cascade. So the more you flow, the more you're training your ability for insight in interacting with your environment. Now the trouble, of course, with the video game is the environment isn't a real world. But in the shaman's world, of course, the shaman's flowing in the real world, the real social world, the real ecological world. But there's something more. It's not just an insight cascade that's going on in flow. That in and of itself would be great. But there's something else going. And this has to do with your capacity for implicit learning. Now notice what's happening here. Notice that although even I'm doing the history, I'm always also doing the cog-sci. Because while I'll be emphasizing the history, the historical account, I'm starting to build what I need to give you the structural functional account.
All right.
Here we are. Sorry about all that. We're still figuring it out.
It'll be much easier when I have a second monitor set up and you guys won't have to see all the switching and things like that. But, you know, we will improve as we go
Okay,
here.
so implicit.
So, yeah. What we've seen so far is him just summing up what he's about to go in depth on. How we... Yeah, we're still there. We're still in game.
In game.
Yeah, we're still rolling. So yeah, he's summing up the idea of the flow state, how the shamans access flow state in order to increase their capacity for insight.
Yeah, and they are the ones that create the practices that change our perspectives and get us into the flow state. Like they're like the pioneer technicians, if you will.
Yeah.
People figuring this out, like, you know, like, why do I feel this way when I do it? What is this? You know, like, they're the pioneers. Yeah. They're
playing
the
on the edges. They're constantly challenging themselves with new frames, novel challenges, ever increasing challenges, and so let's play through you have some good notes here. Shamans create practices to change perspectives to get into the flow state. And what is flow state?
Yeah, and it's basically the optimal level of cognition to be between boredom and anxiety. You know, you're just past your ability where you get bored, but not so far past that you get anxiety and like, I can't keep up with this. And you know, he mentions musicians, and there's definitely something into that. You know, if you're improvising with people as a live musician.
Good learning.
Excuse me, Vervaeke. I want to find that chart that he showed. Did he show that yet, or is that coming up?
He already showed that.
Okay, where was it?
Nah. But yeah, so in the music,
There it is.
you play to your ability level, and just past it. And if you get a little too far into it, like I won't play with the jazz guys because that stuff's way too far. It would just give me anxiety. Yeah, there's the chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, down there at the bottom there, you got the boredom, then you got the anxiety.
So if you have increasing skills, but your challenges aren't increasing, then you're kind of in a state of boredom. Increase the challenge, and then you get here. Now, of course, in the state of anxiety, challenge can increase, but you don't have the skill to keep up, so you're in that peak anxiety. But as you increase your skills, you start to come into this channel that allows for the flow state.
And that's where all the jazzers and the athletes and everything, that's that channel. And you can really push the edge of it too and get right up onto almost to the point of anxiety and even drift into it. And if you can catch yourself from falling too far back out of it.
Yeah.
Because nothing will ruin a good jam like going back down to boring. But
it's a difficult thing to sustain for long periods of time, but it's something that you can certainly become better at, and you can adapt that into other situations.
I don't know if it's necessarily difficult. Maybe like musically, because it requires, and other things, because it requires a certain amount of like practice to get into there. But we have these wonderful things that, what do you call them? Flow induction mechanisms, like video games and other, even other puzzle games and other stuff. You really get into the flow. And video games are so good because you're able to do things like physically that your body, like Quake. Remember Quake? Anybody remember Quake? Like how fast that game was.
It's amazing that the human brain can actually perform actions faster than it could in real life. Because that game, you're running around like 30 miles an hour, and you're able to flip around backwards
even beyond that with
do
those
a 180
pro guys,
in a
man. They make you
millisecond.
sick, man. It's
yeah.
Oh boy,
it's cool.
It's
it's just imagine humans inhabiting robots in the future that move around that fast.
But I could see, I could see these mechanisms becoming useful, to be able to like monitor what the brain's doing while they're, going through it, and very readable. And these games, as well as the testing for them, require, really tight feedback between the person and, like the guy playing the game and the game itself. If you've ever played a game that got laggy on you, you are not in the flow state. It's not possible. But if it's real tight, you're real into it. And also, it has to be clear. Like your goals, objectives, the information has to be clear what you're going for. No wishy-washy. Yes. Particularly when you're studying it, you got to have clear data.
You can tell it by the experience of it. It's a sense of at-one-ment, deep attunement, effortlessness. We've all experienced it, like in a moment, even like when you do that no-look shot with the crumpled up piece of paper into the trash can, and you actually make it without thinking, or anything around that area. That's flow. Yeah.
And the other thing is there has to be a component of this could always fail, like from even like the jazz thing.
The challenge factor of it. That there's consequences.
Sure. Well, you have to have a goal and the ability to miss it and fail.
Consequences, you're getting this give and take feedback, like when you're climbing the mountain and adjusting yourself.
Yeah, well, mountain climbing, that's like the ultimate. Like, you fail, you die, or you get really hurt, So it's like,
So effortlessness, the sense of timelessness, and sense of self disappears, basically. It's almost like you're watching yourself do the thing.
Yeah,
rather than doing it.
And it's like, why would we do this? Well, there is a component that feels good, but he mentions that it's not a pleasurable thing. It's something that's really tied into like meaning and life.
There you go. I was just thinking meaningfulness. It generated intense meaningfulness for us. Yes.
And let's see what else.
So it helps us generate insights.
Yeah.
So we can exact insights gained into other situations.
Yeah, you can definitely with whatever gives you the flow, you can apply that to just about anything in your life.
Yeah.
You can realize the discrete patterns that are in there.
Yeah. Giving a speech at a wedding.
It's a universal thing, like you said. It's like within all religions and also all skill sets, it's universal.
Challenging moment in traffic where you actually respond perfectly, and avoid an accident.
Yeah, and understanding that, the universal component of it will, as he said, allow us to understand the machinery of cognition.
Yes.
Like more than we've ever had before. Because for most of history, it was a very mystical thing. Your mystics talked about these things and had this kind of understanding. Now it's becoming very scientific, which, without being overly sterilized scientific, it's clear, at least what, the way he's talking about what they're trying to do. Clear information, clear data. We can, create these environments
that are more conducive to helping engender flow state in people. Rather than, the factory style education we have now is this leftover from a period of time where you wanted a lot of people that were going to be working in the factories to understand drills and to pay attention, be acquiescent to authority, and not so much critical thinking, but more memorize and regurgitate the information you're told. And really, we need to be able to think critically, to be able to solve complex problems, and being able to practice the flow state in lieu of, or along with also complex tasks, allows us to be more able agents in our environments and work together. Of course,
and
much better.
And we
feel a deep thought coming.
Well, I've been trying to figure out the English words in order to do it. I don't think with words. I think with images and other things like that. So it's a bit difficult on occasion. But we need the flow state, and we need these experiences that engender it, because we really do need to break our framing. Like, most of our understanding about the world is a pretty tight framing at this point. And we're pretty open-minded people, but even our framing is pretty damn tight. And
we got to start learning to. So Vervaeke is also really interested in dialogos and the art of utilizing, what did he call it? Distributed cognition.
Distributed cognitive networks.
Distributive cognitive networks and distributed
I like that
cognition.
It's like the human internet before
like
we had
language.
the internet.
The fact that we speak in a language is something that we developed, that we all use together now. And it helps us distribute our cognition over many people at once, because now we can take part in tasks together and understand things at a very deep level together, because we can communicate them.
And 4 eyes are better than 2, when
then we came up with the internet, after we came up with all these different other modes of psychotechnologies, he calls them, of like distributed cognition. Books, were a part of that. Radio was a part of that. And now we're at this point in the internet age. And we are facing a meaning crisis. So how do we develop these modes of sense making that we can take part in together, because no one person can figure out how humanity solves potential crises it faces in times of breakdown and dissolution and loss of meaning, because this is at the root of the breakdown that's happening in our culture right now, and everybody that is alive right now is quite cognizant that something has changed, and we're in the midst of something like a shift, like a phase shift or a transition, and it very much is something that we can awaken through, and it'd be an ongoing awakening together.
It'd be like a multi-individual insight cascade. Which, I have notes here that for insight cascade, more training,
I love that,
more
that
insight,
idea.
And you can do this in the
Cascade
real world,
of insights.
and you can do this in a simulated world, and it creates a capacity for insight.
It primes insight. He said it's like priming insight.
And what we're doing is we're like literally going through and breaking our framing.
Having a light bulb moment, and then but in the flow state, it's stretched out light bulb moment,
and we're reconstructing our cognition to assist in changing ourselves to refit to a new problem. And I think there's been a lot of people, like actually probably most of us in more ways than we think, that have been just doing this naturally without thinking about it, but putting words to it, literacy, back to literacy, that wonderful toolbox that is. It allows us to reflect on our thoughts.
Because we can write them down, and we can put them online in text form, and we can hold very complex ideas to get that, or very hard to hold in our minds all at once, but you can explicate these things out together in conversation.
We got all types of methods to draw bubbles around things and lead to other things, and all sorts of different graphical measures that we've gone through to be able to consolidate data and ideas. It's not just talking or written either. We've gotten very
we're using HD video.
Sure.
And,
3D graphics and
music videos. Think of the way that people are communicating nowadays with YouTube channels and Twitch channels and everything like we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah, we have become the media. It's everybody's now. Yeah. And this is such a power and has such a double-edged sword. We see its effect on people at the way the social media, the most popular ones are tuned, these algorithms are tuned such that they're appealing to the worst angels of our nature. It just happens to be that limbic lizard brain, and it's, we're getting these endorphin releases from little likes and things like that make us feel safe and secure and appreciated. And it's very addictive the way that they hit you with the notifications and everything else, and the way they show you things, and it's based and similar to casino style algorithms.
It's almost like a forced flow state,
a mutant version of that. Like a what?
A forced flow state, like it's just entertaining enough
where
it
like
keeps you out of boredom.
It's like a trance,
but it doesn't.
You're not very aware.
Yeah,
because when you're in the flow state, everything's super salient.
It's
right?
like the bottom left.
You looked
corner.
up the word salient too, didn't you?
Yeah.
While we were watching.
So when he mentioned the word super salient, and I can't find an actual definition of that, but we can break it down. Where salience is
super salient. Yeah.
The fact of being important to or connected with what is happening or being discussed. So super salience is the feeling of
things are very apparent
and extra apparent. Even the most subtle things are most apparent. Like for those of us who have been psychonauts in our present or our past, that feeling you get where it's like, I understand. Oh, it's realer than real. It's more vivid. And you can, I'm sure the marathon runner gets it, that runner's high. They get that as well. Like,
for sure.
When I'm playing
it's
music,
the same
I
experience.
get that thing, and it's that feeling of like, the realer than
real. On
the
psychedelics, it's like there's a lot of, how do you describe it? There's this geometric and floral and organic and kind of ongoing, ultimately beautiful animatedness to everything. And it comes alive and it changes like based off your imagination, or you can go into it and let it tell its story. And that's like these fireworks side to it, but it's they're interrelating. It's almost like a transdimensional communication because there's visual, there's auditory, there's experiential. But the experience of flow itself and oneness and timelessness and realer than real, super salience, that's available anytime. That's and gradation, like the marathon runner certainly experiences it. The meditation practitioner experiences it. The yoga, Kundalini yoga practitioner experiences it. And in fact, there's varying levels of these flow states. People use fasting, they use sleep deprivation. There's all different ways that people have found to release the endogenous endorphins and hormones in our bodies and chemicals like DMT that certainly also are inducive of the flow states and perhaps tied directly with.
We figured out how to exact those chemicals that our brain naturally produce. The little,
we found them growing all over the place too.
Yeah,
and
well, that's the interesting thing. We've naturally have them in us, and we can express them and make them express themselves. But then there's also, I don't want to call them
be lawful,
not simulated, but yes, be lawful in all ways.
They're safe and actual.
But then there's things that they found that is
natural
not naturally of the brain, but still do the same or similar effect, or engage the brain in another way. So the brain being this physical tool, we're using the tool for another way, and we've figured out that certain whole things that we can do these things as well. So and there always seems to be like a physical component to our psychotechnologies as well, like whether it's just in the structure and the chemical nature of the brain, or if it's like say like, hey, we had these thumbs that were originally for grasping at branches, but then we developed another range of movement in our wrists because we started using these a whole lot more, and and then the brain started changing. If you've ever seen the homunculus, it's a little medical drawing with big lips, big eyeballs, big ears, big hands, big feet, big old junk.
The way that we see ourselves in our brains.
How much of the brain is dedicated to each
or
portion
dedicated
of the body.
actually the networks.
Well, the hands are a big thing
nervous
of that
system.
Too. We're tool using creatures, and we'll use all of the tools. But before we keep rambling on, Let's get up to...
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that we produce these substances endogenously within our own bodies is perhaps because of that time back when we were apes and we were discovering them in their environments and ingesting them, just like we have millions of cannabinoid receptors.
It might be way older than this, because cannabinoid receptor, I mean, sea urchins have cannabinoid receptors.
We would have been eating these things for perhaps 2 million years-ish more. I don't know. But like the last 200,000 years, particularly, something happened. Yeah. Then the 40,000 years ago, something really crazy happened, and now we're here.
All right, let's bring this back up to 1557.
So, back to the flow state with John Vervaeke. The magic is happening. Oh my goodness. Oh, which one is...
We'll talk about this through like sort of insight and restructuring, when I can just enough exact and extend my skills to meet the demands. So I have to put everything, because while I'll be emphasizing the history, the historical account, I'm starting to build what I need to give you the structural functional account. Okay, so implicit learning. This goes back to work done in the 60s by Arthur Reber and a whole bunch of other people. So what Reber was doing is he was originally trying to understand how people learn language. What he was doing was he was generating an arbitrary set of rules, completely arbitrary, just make them up on the spot, set of rules for how you can link strings of letters and or numbers together. Like the rule might be you can't have more than 3 vowels in a row, or you have to have 2 consonants, and then you generate letter strings. 8, 9 long. These are so long that you can't sort of easily hold them in your working memory. And then this is what you do. You generate an indefinite number. You generate a huge number of these strings, and you just show them to people. Here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. Okay, that's the first part of the experiment. Then you do the second part of the experiment. Now you generate a whole bunch of strings, but 2 kinds. One set of strings is generated by that artificial set of rules, and so follows the same rules as the first set. And then the second set is generated by a completely different set of rules. Okay? And what you do is you mix up the first and the second together. And this is the task you give people. Can you tell me the strings that belong with the strings you saw before? There you go. Now, Reber originally thought what would happen is people would, because it seems like so random. What he found was people score well above chance consistently on this. People can tell you, oh no, those strings, yeah, those belong with the old ones. No, that one doesn't. That one does, that one doesn't. Now here's what's interesting. You now ask people, why? How do you know that? And they'll give you one of 2 answers. They'll say, I don't know. I don't know. I just feel it. Which is, woo. Or they give you some explanation. They'll give you some rule or procedure they're using, and here's what we know. They're deceiving themselves or lying to you because that rule that they're using wouldn't actually predict their success. So you are picking up, you have this tremendous capacity outside your conscious awareness, right, to pick up on very complex patterns in your environment. And you say, okay, why? What does this have to do with shamanism? Well, hang on, because we talked about the shaman picking up on patterns last time. Let's go back to this. Let me talk about an experiment that's really interesting. So there was some work done on this idea, that people have psychic abilities, and there's the feeling of being stared at. People can tell when they're being stared at. And people reliably report that they think, oh, I knew somebody was staring at me. I could just feel it in the back of my neck and stuff like that. And so they ran an experiment in which they did the following. They'd have somebody in a room, blindfolded, earplugged. They can't sense anything. Nobody's allowed to wear perfumes or anything. That person can't see or hear or feel, and they're just standing in the room. Unbeknownst to that person, people would come in and stare at them. And then they had to report if the person at the center of the room had to report if they were being stared at or not. And people were reporting this well above chance. They were saying, I think I'm being stared at. And there was somebody there. And of course, first of all, they was, ooh, right. But then it turned out that if you made a slight change to that experiment, it wouldn't replicate. So what was going on? You bring people into the room, and they say, I think I'm being stared at, and the researchers would tell them if they were correct or not. They would say, you're right, or you're wrong. So what? You say, so what? Well, here's the thing. The researchers thought they were introducing people, the viewers, into the room randomly. But it turns out they weren't introducing them randomly, because you know what's very hard for you to do? Random stuff. They were actually introducing people as viewers in a complex pattern. And the person that was blindfolded and earplugged was implicitly learning the pattern because they were getting feedback. If you take the feedback away, if you don't tell them, whenever they say, I'm being stared at or not, if you don't tell them whether they're right or wrong, their performance drops to chance. See, a lot of what looks like psychic abilities are your ability to pick up implicitly on complex patterns in the environment without being aware of it. So, Hogarth, in his book on educating intuition, makes a really cool claim. Makes a very good argument, in fact, I think, for this. He says that what we call intuition is a real thing, but there isn't anything sort of magical about it, like the psychics say, or something like that. Your intuition is the result of your implicit learning. You pick up on all kinds of complex patterns, not knowing how you have done that, but you get an ability to detect patterns, and you don't know how. That's why your intuition feels the way it does. You just sort of know. Like, you know things, you're doing it all the time. To use a famous example from Dreyfus, you know how far to stand from somebody. And what angle to like where you should stand, how close you should stand, what angle you should stand, how, as the conversation or the context changes, you're allowed to move closer or farther away, what angles you're allowed to be at. But if I were to ask you to tell me how you do that, you wouldn't know. You would just say, I know how to do it. And yet, when people don't know how to do it, it creeps you out. It creeps you out. Okay, so intuition. Now, Hogarth points out, and this is something very common, right? Hogarth points out that, we have two different terms and we don't realize we're talking about the same thing. We have intuition when we think it's going well, that implicit learning, but we also have bias and prejudice for when we think that implicit learning goes bad. The bigot has got intuitions about races that are wrong. Now, how is it that implicit learning goes wrong? Well, here's the thing. You have some complex pattern in the environment, right? And your implicit learning picks up on it. The problem is there's two kinds of patterns in your environment. There's correlations, there's correlation patterns, and causal patterns. Now, what do I mean by that? Correlations is when any two things are related to each other. So, let me give you an example of a couple of correlations that you shouldn't confuse with causation. There is a correlation between how large your wedding is and how long your marriage will last. If you have a bigger wedding, your marriage will last longer. Now, you would be a fool to therefore think you should have the biggest possible wedding. Because the reason why bigger weddings predict longer marriages is not because bigger weddings cause longer marriages, is because, right, they're only correlated. It's because bigger weddings reflect a bigger social network, more financial resources, and having a bigger social network for the couple, having more financial resources, actually does cause a marriage to last longer. Here's another one. So I'm old enough, right? And I was brought up in a religious household that I was, when prayer was taken out of the schools. And of course, people were very upset about that. Look at crime is going up as we've taken prayer out of the schools and things like that. By the way, crime hasn't been going up. Read some of Steven Pinker's work. But let's say it was. That's only a correlation. Because here's another correlation. We know that greenhouse gases have been going up steadily. And that's part of the environmental crisis we're going to talk about. You know what has been also consistently going down for the exact same time period? Caribbean piracy. Having pirates in the Caribbean and wooden ships with cannons and stuff. As that went down, greenhouse gases went up. Now, I hope none of you think that we could solve global warming by bringing back piracy. Okay? So there are many things there are many patterns in the world that are illusory because they're only correlational. They're not causal. See, the bigot has picked up on correlational patterns, not causal patterns. So what you want to do is you want to train your implicit learning to pick up on the causal patterns that are real rather than the correlational patterns that are illusory. Now here's what you can't do. You can't tell people to look for patterns explicitly. Go back to Reber's experiment. If you put people into that experiment where they're looking at the letter strings and you tell them explicitly what they're supposed to do, try and figure out the rules. Consciously, deliberately try to figure out the rules. Their performance doesn't get better. It gets worse. Okay? And Hogarth notes this in his book on educating intuition. We can't replace implicit learning with explicit learning because it is precisely by being implicit that it works so well. What can we do explicitly then? What we can do is set up the right context, the right environmental factors, so that my implicit learning machine will tend more likely to get onto causal patterns rather than correlational patterns. So I'll get good intuition rather than bad intuition. How do you do that? Well, Hogarth says the way you would do this is the way you do science. You want to control the context, right? Because what science is, and you know, there's a lot of science. Look, science is a way of distinguishing causal patterns from correlational patterns. You set up an environmental situation so that you can distinguish the causal patterns from the correlational patterns. Well, what do? Well, in an experiment, first of all, I make sure that everything is very clearly measured. I get very clear information. Very clear information. I make sure I'm looking to see that, right, that the change in one variable is closely followed by a change in another variable. So I change your drug dosage, do your symptoms get better? Right? So I look for clear information, I look for clear feedback, and in science, failure matters. You test a hypothesis, and disconfirmation has to be possible. Failure matters. Now notice this. What Hogarth says is, well, what I want to do is I want to put you into an implicit learning situation where you get clear feedback, like you do in science, where there is a tight coupling between what you do and how the environment responds, and where error really matters, like in science. And he says what we should do is we should try and do implicit learning in those kinds of contexts. Well, here's what myself and my colleagues argued. Those three criteria that will turn your intuition into good implicit learning are exactly the conditions for flow. Clear information, tightly coupled feedback, and error matters. The rock climber is looking for needs clear information, tightly coupled feedback, and error really matters. That context really means that there's a much greater chance that their implicit learning machinery is going to pick up on causal patterns rather than correlational ones. So, notice what we've got going on here.
And we're back.
We're back.
We're back, everybody. Not like we went anywhere.
No. We're still kicking it.
I went and got a beer, but you know, that's not really anywhere. Oh yeah, man. This is for my notes. This is the implicit learning section. This is all about what implicit learning is.
Yes, versus explicit.
And he explains this through some examples of experiences. One being Reber's experiment, and that's the letter strings, and you have long enough with rules, and you have string's long enough that you can't remember, it's not like a 3-letter something. It's long enough where you're going to have a hard time remembering, and then it's a lot. But somehow we're able to
reliably recognize patterns,
and without really knowing, because like you said, if
we've implicitly learned how to do this.
Yeah, and we do it with language. That's how you learn to read. That's how you learn to speak. That's how you learn to understand the contextual vocabulary. That's actually how I got through school, through vocabulary.
How you get metaphor.
And he also did the.
So it's basically by doing, rather than just something that you're told.
Yeah.
Explicitly.
Yeah, and
it's that internal learning.
And you'll be able to, like in this string of letters experiment, the person who is in the experiment uncannily is able to tell which group is from which group without knowing the rule sets or knowing anything else. And like you said, they'll either say, well, I don't know, I just felt it. And feeling is a big component of this intuition. Or they'll just put together a string of bullshit to either convince themselves or to convince you.
Try and explain somehow how it,
maybe
some cyclical way.
After the fact, you could explain the rules and why they're different, but that would take you a long time. And then the other experiment was, the people looking at you experiment, and the variable in there that made the change between pure random and something else was asking, or not asking, telling them whether they got it right or not. It was just like, were they watching you, yes or no? And,
no, so there's some pattern of feedback.
And there might have been some smell sense too. I don't know how they killed the smell, because pheromones are a strong thing. Even when you can't smell the pheromones, you can still smell the pheromones.
Yeah. I wonder if it's a small room too. Can you tell the change in pressure in the room or something like that as well? But this doesn't take the magic away from anything. And Vervaeke himself, he's more open-minded than he's given an expression of here. We'll get there though. But isn't it magical how we're always have been like just spinning atoms, vibrating into some kind of tangible, solid forms that we interact with and live through. And the whole universe is a trip. The fact when we're speaking and making sounds, we're sending these sound waves out through the atmosphere of a room that we're in, and you can hear how it reverberates, and it affects us. And it's like we're spelling whenever we use language. Originally, language was just sigils, like power symbols that had this loaded deep meaning to us, like a lightning bolt for power or something like that. You put that on a rock or on your skin, and it's a very powerful effect on those that encounter it. And then when we started to string the sigils into actual words, we called that spelling. And we're still doing that to this day.
It's a certain little magical thing we do.
Yeah, the whole thing seems quite magical when you
and he
take a step back.
He brings up that whole, the psychic is really just a person you can pick up on very, very complex, discrete patterns of information without realizing they're doing it.
They do have a heightened awareness that they're utilizing.
Yeah, you know. And some people, you can train it. You got, the Miss Cleos and whatever that can, like you just tell them stuff and they can just figure out.
I don't know where the borderline is between what's real and what's just BS. It's hard to say because
I'm sure some of that BS is very real.
I had a premonitory dream once that came real, and it was like somebody put a videotape of the future in my head in a dream, because it was photographically real. It was vivid as unlike any dream I'd ever had. It was like an event that happened in my life a week later to the T. I mean, it's not worth discussing here in detail, but it's happened to me, and so I have to remain open-minded to some degree, but I do think most of the psychics out there are full of it.
Yeah, I've been, since listening.
But I don't want to discourage that.
Well, no, dude, I've met people.
But I like that. But then again,
that legitimately somehow be able to pick up on stuff that.
Yeah, we should be able to be wise.
I can't say how they got the information, but they're able to pick up on that stuff.
Not just with our psychic abilities,
but mystical or not, it's still pretty magical.
But with our words,
to me.
with our actions, and I love this.
Well, and
there's this way of
those are the
approaching that the Buddhists have, that they are very much like, just don't do magical stuff, because it's, you don't want to do stuff for yourself, so what you do instead as you send out blessings for all beings, for the awakening of all beings and all life, and you use it that way, and save that for super wise beings and transdimensional awareness that are playing on some other level. And
so he goes back to the shaman, and he's going to continuously go back to the shaman. It's going to tie in that one that knows, right? Well, the shaman is the one who can pick up on these discrete patterns themselves, and actually, creates techniques in order to train yourself to pick up on these discrete patterns. Mm-hmm. So they can train their own intuition and other people's intuition on these patterns. And we can see these shamans as like medicine women, or medicine men, the crazy old witch, the crazy old wizard, that one person at the end of the street that, like you're a little freaked out about because she always knows what's going on or something, somehow, but these are the people that have that insight. And so
this allows us as groups, as individuals, and then as larger societies to be able to sense make more effectively in our environments, to survive and to be able to thrive together. So these are things that we have forgotten, and we're starting to lose trust in all of these prevailing institutions.
Well, we should be able to teach ourselves handing down these and teach each other's intuition. Hogarth, in Educating Intuition, he brings that up, and he mentions that implicit learning is intuition, and he gives the example of like knowing how to posture yourself when you're talking to people in different circumstances and all that, or where you can when you're walking down the street, to get out of the way of people, and all these just different little things,
automatic things that you know how to.
So implicit learning is intuition, and in my mind they're interchangeable at this point as far as usage goes. At least
it's
in my
great
mind,
pattern recognition. You learn in your social environment how to be. That's implicit.
But
learning.
Then there's the other side of this coin, which is the bias side that he brings up.
Yes.
You've got your intuition, you got your bias, and it's when one goes good and one goes bad.
Causal patterns for actual.
Correlational patterns for
correlational patterns for causal patterns. Thank you. Yes.
And he brings up the weddings and the pirates thing. If you have a big wedding, you're going to stick together forever. Well, that's not true. I've known a lot of people.
And in a deeply complex world, it's easy for us to constantly. Make correlations that are not accurate.
When your data set's very narrow within a huge span of nuance as well.
Right.
Like while we're watching this, you mentioned ideological possession, and regardless of what your ideology is, it focuses you down and actually boxes you and frames you. So now instead of intuiting something, you're biasing something. Well, this happened, so it must be this. Opposed to, why did this happen? Okay, I got a little bit of a feeling on me.
And this is where mindfulness is so helpful.
Yeah.
Practices that incorporate mindfulness, deep prayer, deep communion of some transcendent goal of ultimate love and rising to be able to be better people together and for oneself and for something that is greater, that's even beyond explanation or encapsulation. That was something really powerful that had a very potent pull on us, that was a very convincing way of keeping us according to the moral values that we had developed thus far as this crazy hominid primate species that we are.
And we're capable of training this intuition too to pick up on the causal opposed to the correlational. And we've whether it's through religion or practices like yoga or Buddhism or anything else like that, those are training mechanisms. Now, mind you, the times are changing, so we're going to need some new ones.
And rapidly. So it's really easy to get pulled around by our lizard brains because fear of survival is attached to everything that we do in life. And so we're constantly in this state. Buddhism talks about this really well. We're constantly in this state of like dukkha, right? Isn't that the term for it? Like this sense of a wheel off kilter, like things aren't quite right in life, and this happens a lot. And so we have all these artificial fillers that we find. Nourishment feels really good, so you eat a healthy meal, a good meal. Some watermelon when it's hot outside. You need nourishment and hydration, and you need salts and sugars and things. That feels really nourishing. That is as good as, but then there's the junk food bar or whatever it is, and so there's all these ways that we have tuned ourselves that are going against our health and our ability to be attuned to our environments, not just individually, but together as groups, watchful and aware, because when a whole group of people is being designated as a threat to your very well-being, you could easily be turned against them. And we see that happening right now with the right and the left in our country and around the world. Things are getting pretty wild. And so you see this breakdown that's going on in our world today. And us being able to have these conversations and figure out how are we going to make sense of this together. How can we really truly see what is true and then realize what is good for one and all from those discoveries that we're going to have to realize this is going to take more than one brain and more than mine, yours, and 100 others. We need as many people engaging in this project of just choosing the new world that we want to go into.
And one really big hurdle to that is you just can't tell people to look at, look for other patterns. No. You can't tell them to, you can't tell them to, what did they say? You can't tell them to look for patterns explicitly. And what Hogarth said is you can't replace implicit learning with explicit learning. So like a lot of this stuff you can't teach explicitly. And I guess what Vervaeke is really attempting to do is, well, what can we do explicitly to get us into these states in a way that we can actually like analyze it and tell what's going on?
What is the orientation that helps us thread the needle, surf this tidal wave? Yeah.
So yeah, he said something that was cool. Is we can set up environmental factors that will make our implicit learning mechanisms and key onto causal patterns instead of correlational patterns, thus giving us good intuition versus bias. And the way, I guess, to attempt to achieve this is to have tightly controlled context, clear measurements, and making sure your variables change. So when you're trying to figure out which works or not, it's like, well, if I did this, you want to make sure doing this has this change. So if I did this, he mentioned like dosages of medication, but imagine like, if I did this exercise and breathing thing that was supposed to make me feel this way, but I didn't smoke cigarettes before doing it, and I had this I feel great because I'm doing this thing. Well, did you continue smoking? Maybe you should try continue smoking cigarettes and see if maybe you should not smoke cigarettes, but whatever. But the two variables have to be in tandem with each other or very, very close. And your experiment or your analyzation has to be able to fail. Yet again, we're back to you have to be able to fail.
Yeah, no, we have to be able to be willing to be continually upgrading our sense of perception of our environment and the situations that we find ourselves in our world in. Because if we care most for what is true rather than being right, because we're afraid of being wrong and then having to admit that. But if that's not the goal for us and we're clear on that, we're just like, I just want to find out what's good and best and true for one and all together. Like, let's take a side-by-side approach to figuring this problem out that we're encountering right now. I think that's the way, instead of like this constant opposing, like just pure
for the same
debate and not willing to actually hear.
Yeah, that doesn't get you anywhere points of view except for hurt feelings.
Because we're just developing images of one another.
Sure.
That and those images get propagated by multinational corporations.
And they become negative metaphors too. Metaphors are nice and beneficial and all that stuff, but there's also the negative end. Well, you could use inappropriate metaphors to describe people, things, ideas, other things, and that boxes you and frames you in. Metaphor is one of those things that helps you break the boxing of your mind and your understanding.
And we need to do that right now because there's, like I was saying, multinational corporations that would love to decide what the new world is going to look like.
Well, watch out, people. They're doing it with how you speak, your language, how you write things up, the length in which you think.
What you're allowed to say, where you're allowed to say, how far and long, and they're controlling quite a bit now.
Sure. Yeah. And when information has become the highest currency, you have a lot of value and potential in just what you know and how you can communicate it to other people. Like, knowledge really is the most valuable thing in the universe, in my opinion.
We all have access to it now, too.
That's God's goal.
But that there are interests out there that profit from our divide
Sure.
that seek to sow discord amongst our own
And they
nations
sow false knowledge.
to further their own profit and to gain even more control than whole nations have themselves, so that they can then start influencing the direction of the world order rather than free peoples of the world.
Well, they can use these learning techniques we're talking about against you too. So nothing is pure good or pure evil. It's some weird gray in between.
Yeah. So mindfulness, and how can you be truly mindful unless you are being totally unconditional in a moment? So learning to deepen that flow state by mindfulness practices that you can flow with life in every situation that you encounter.
So
pass that on to the children, and then we're growing a better world.
All right. Well, we got two more parts with us. Thanks for
thanks for bearing with anybody that's here listening or watching tonight. Thank you guys so much for taking part. If you enjoy this, I encourage you. I got to make sure I have the link when I post this everywhere else to this series on YouTube. Just search John Vervaeke, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and you'll find a playlist.
And if you have any comments or critiques or any additions to the conversations, places that you thought we were wrong, places that you thought we were spot on, let us know in any of the commenting features that you get wherever you view this. Get in on the conversation. Eventually, hey, maybe we'll make a Discord or something specifically for that, so we can have a regular conversation chain going on. Because conversation, in my mind, and I think in probably a lot of other people's mind, is key. Is really key to figuring out
collective
these problems.
Sense making.
Yeah, well, the distributed cognitive networks, you know,
Before the internet, up everywhere right now. Yeah.
Before the internet, there was the way we did it before, and the internet's just a more smooth set of techniques that works a little faster than just word of mouth. But we're still doing the same thing as we would be if we were telling stories to one person who traveled to another side and convey the information or have a written note. Or we're just doing it faster.
Just a little faster. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. The Pony Express is fast, but I mean,
we were quite fast though as ideas, and when somebody like major like president or something died, it made its way across the nation pretty quickly. Yeah. But yeah, now we're certainly advancing exponentially, accelerating the rate at which we can share information and the resolution definition with which we can share it.
And we're not quite at this part yet in the series, but we talked about the Upper Paleolithic transition, and then we're going to get into the Axial Revolution and the Bronze Age and all that stuff within this video. But I'm looking forward to eventually getting to the point where we're at now, and we can discuss what is this mental revolution that we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yes, the meaning crisis, but like, what are the challenges? What are the needs?
There's a lot of different groups working around this right now. Yeah, you got the Integral Stage on YouTube. You have the Consilience Project, .org, I believe, online. You have the Center for Humane Technology. So that's Tristan Harris, among others, and Daniel Schmachtenberger working at the Consilience Project, among others. And you have Vervaeke's work and those that he's interacting with right now. You have the Game Bee community. And so there's a lot of different groups that noticed that there was like a coming kind of breakdown scenario, and it was just going to take one thing to be like a tipping point. And then all of the bad actors would come in to take advantage of the situation.
It came quick, but too, man. It came real quick. I mean, like, it's like slow, fast, right?
Yeah. No, it's inevitable, you know.
Hey, you know,
it feels like a growth stage. Like we really are in like this kind of cocoon moment.
I wouldn't live in any other period of time
than
this.
Or we butterfly.
Yeah, this. You know, it's traumatic, but it's a good time to be alive, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, you could be just dismissive or defeatist even about it, and just be like, well, it's already fucked, you know.
Yeah.
Just gonna find a way to protect my own and do what I gotta do, or just give up trying and just feel nihilistic about it.
Nah, I refuse to do that. There's room.
Why not go out? Go out swinging, go out flying, go out like fireworks. Like, we've always done as human beings. The stranger will jump in front of a vehicle for you to save your ass without even thinking about it.
Yeah,
it's just the thing to do in that moment.
All right,
and that's what we do.
All right, so the next part. Are we at the right spot? It's 28.
I believe so. Yeah, I didn't do any rewinding this time. So yeah, let's
the
get
shaman
back
is
on
getting
to
into
it.
the flow state. He's developing all these techniques for getting into this deeply immersive, comprehensive comprehensive flow state. And they're getting an insight cascade, and they're also getting enhanced implicit learning, picking up on very complex, real complex patterns. Now this is intuitive. They don't know how they're doing it. Now here's what's interesting too. These two are reinforcing each other. Because the insight gets your cognition to explore for new patterns, and then the implicit learning picks up those new patterns. And then those new patterns enhance your ability to restructure, and then, right, you keep exploring for new patterns, acquiring the new patterns through implicit learning, and you keep ratcheting your skills up. Getting into the flow state is deeply, deeply enhancing of your cognition. Somebody who's an expert at getting into the flow state is going to be an individual you want to have around. Now that individual is going to have some really serious challenges facing them. They don't know how they're getting a lot of the information they're getting. They don't know why they're so insightful. They don't, and they're experiencing this radical at-one-ment with the world, this loss of sense of self, when they're enacting the animal, right? You have to understand, these insights aren't verbal insights. Like in the 9-dot problem, it's not words, it's not beliefs. It's getting an insight in how the deer moves. It's getting an insight, an intuitive insight in how to talk to this person, to trigger the placebo effect, to help them to heal right now. So, getting into the flow state, notice what's going on here. Notice you're getting something that's almost like a mystical experience. It's a powerful altered state of consciousness. It's enhancing your cognitive processing. And the shaman is making meaning. They're singing, they're dancing, they're telling stories, they're altering people's sense of what matters, they're altering people's sense of identity, they're healing and transforming people. What does that mean? Why would that have powered the Upper Paleolithic transition? Well, first of all, this is enhancing your cognition. And this goes towards the work of Michael Winkelmann and also Matt Rossano. What's happening in this state is your brain is learning to get areas to talk to each other that normally don't talk to each other. This is especially the case if you've gone through a massive disruption strategy, fasting, social isolation, taking psychedelics. Because if you look at a brain scan of somebody who's having a psychedelic experience, areas of the brain that normally do not talk to each other are talking to each other now. Now, if I was just to do that to you, if I was just to get areas to talk to each other, you'd experience that as noise. But if you've got enhanced insight and enhanced intuition, those areas are now talking to each other, and you can bridge between them. You can connect them. And now this is an ability you take for granted. You think it is just the normal part of your cognition. This is your capacity for metaphor. The word metaphor is itself a metaphor. It means to bridge, to carry over, to connect things that are normally not connected. And what you need to understand is how pervasive metaphor is. I showed you a little bit last time, the idea of a project. But I want you to reflect now, and notice the word reflect is a metaphor, on how your thought and language is filled with metaphor. By the way, that was a metaphor. I'll say, for example, do you see what I'm saying? Do you get my point? Do you comprehend it? Can you grasp it? Do you understand it? These are all metaphors. I'm about halfway through this talk. I hope it's not too hard for you. Do you see? It's pervasive and profound. All of your cognition, this is work done by Lakoff and others. I have some criticisms of some of their theory, but the idea that your cognition is filled and functions through metaphorical enhancement, that's just, I think, the case. Now, why is metaphor so powerful? Because metaphor is how you make creative connections between ideas. Metaphorical cognition is at the heart of both science and art. When the shamans are enhancing this machinery, they're connecting areas of the brain that normally didn't talk to each other and affording a massive enhancement in metaphor. One of the ways in which your cognition and meaning and altered states of consciousness come together is in how your mind, your embodied mind, is generating metaphor in order to make insightful connections. There's a deep connection between how insightful, how good a problem solver you are, and your capacity for metaphorical thought. That's why when somebody is facing a problem and they need to restructure how they think about it, we tell them to use an analogy, to think of a metaphor. So, this is the point. The shaman is developing psychotechnologies for altering the state of consciousness to get into the flow state. And that flow state is already making them more insightful and more intuitively powerful, but it is also making them generators of metaphor. Literally providing people with the forms of thought that will allow them to connect ideas, such that making inscriptions on a piece of bone can track the moon. Carving this figurine can connect me to ideas of fertility. So we're seeing a lot of the themes that we're going to develop coming to the fore here. How much, right, the shaman is weaving together, enhancing cognition, altered states of consciousness, and improving our capacity for making sense of the world, literally making more meaning. If you're a hunter-gatherer group and you have a shaman, you're going to outcompete groups that don't. There's a reason why it's universal. There's a reason why the flow phenomena is universal. Because this exapts some of our most basic machinery, enhances it in a powerful way. Now, the shamans have a very interesting kind of experience. They go through this transformation. They often experience what's called soul flight, as if they've gone to another world and they're flying through it. This is the origin. I mean, think of how we've come to this. But this is the origin of getting high. When the shaman does this, the shaman experiences themselves as if they're flying above the world. Why? Why would the brain generate that? Well, think about this. The shaman is getting a much more comprehensive grasp of more complex patterns, but they're experiencing it mostly intuitively and metaphorically. Where are you when you get a bigger picture of things? You're above them. How do we often explain this even to ourselves metaphorically? Right? You have oversight. Somebody who is in charge of things has oversight of them, or has supervision of them. Do you see that? Those are metaphors. Those are metaphors that are little whispers, little echoes of shamanic flight, flying over things, getting an intuitive, insightful grasp that is expressed metaphorically of a deeper connection to the world. We're going to pick up on all of these themes as we investigate more the machinery of meaning making.
All right, we back.
Yes. It's a little short spot packed with a lot of information.
Yeah, that part's really cool. Vervaeke going deep.
Yeah, so there's things that the shaman gets, through developing these techniques to get into the flow state. What they get the insight cascade, enhanced implicit learning or intuition, and both the insight cascade and the implicit learning reinforce each other over and over and over again. And these useful individuals that know how to do this don't necessarily know how they are gaining these insights, at least this early period of time. It's not like they're like, oh, well, I know, like, doing this causes this, which causes me to get this. It's an intuitive...
Yeah, it's something that developed over a very long time. They developed deep rituals for helping engender these different states of flow within themselves and insights that gain through flow in others as well. So they utilize altered states, so they're like reframing and allowing their brain to talk to each other in new ways, and parts of brain.
Yeah, and these altered states, whichever variety that they are, give you these mystical experiences that ultimately enhance your cognitive processing and helps make meaning,
yes,
that religious feeling of, now you have this meaning, this wow.
Yeah, meaning making. The mystical experiences that the shaman has allows them to be meaning makers, very powerful meaning makers. Yeah. And by imbuing that meaning, somehow they're able to bring out a placebo effect of healing, like just even with pills alone. We know in studies today that it's 30 to 40% placebo effect. And that's interesting. Like, what is that? That sounds magical too. Like the body's self-healing capacity is being triggered.
Yeah. Oh, that's another mystery.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, we don't understand exactly how that happens.
Yeah, and so why did this power the Upper Paleolithic transition? Well, it seems simple to say this, but it enhanced networks between parts of your brain that don't normally communicate, but doing it in a way where it's not just noise and chatter that's going to drive you nuts.
Yes.
And it would be interesting to really see what the brain looks like when going through as many of the different variations of generating flow state as we can.
Mystical states, flow states as well. I would imagine they'd be similar.
Yeah, sure. Well, like even through the chanting, and like if you've done extensive chanting work, you get that same feeling. Mm-hmm. You're literally in the flow. You're not ahead of it. You're not behind it. You're with it.
You're in. You're flowing with it.
And
so the power of enhancing metaphor, the metaphorical capacity of the brain that allows for this increased cognitive capacity for insight generation, even to be in the midst of a ongoing cascade of insights, like a long
or
light bulb moment. No. It can be like that level of
sure,
but you're like a step back. You're watching it. You're very much also watching that happen, kind of detached.
Yeah,
and very secure. You're feeling your best. It's supercharged with meaning. It isn't just like a good feeling. It's a deeply meaningful experience to be in the flow state, and that's why rock climbing is addictive, among other things that induce flow state. Video games as well. Yeah.
So the metaphor, which is a metaphor in and of itself.
The word metaphor,
is to bridge over, to get things that are not normally connected, like parts of your brain. It's everywhere in thought and language. Like think about this though, it's everywhere. Now that we've mentioned this, that it's everywhere. Listen to yourself speak, and when you speak and you use words, almost every other word you use is some type of metaphor. somehow.
So many of our metaphors are about throwing and grasping and grabbing,
Yeah.
and yeah. Do you get this? Can you grasp this? What are the other examples he makes? I wrote down a few of them. They were funny.
Is this too hard for you to find your notes?
Is this too hard for you? I don't know where they are now. It's okay. What were you gonna say there?
Well, I was gonna go on with metaphor. Metaphor enhances the cognition, so good thing we have it everywhere. It enhances our ability to think.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
It's how you make creative connections between ideas, and it's at the heart of art and science. Metaphor. Everything's a metaphor. It's analogous for it's an analog for everything else.
Yeah. Do you see? Yeah. Do you get his point? It's like a pointing directional. Our eyes are at the front of our heads. We develop language that works very well with the way that our consciousness trains itself.
I definitely think we're going in the right direction.
Thinking in linear sense of time. Yeah, the direction. Yeah, and thinking that we're going in that right direction being a good thing. So there's the sense of time.
And there seems to be a connection between insightful and metaphorical thought too. So it's like there's this trinity between practicing, getting into the flow state and metaphor, and and then it reinforces itself in its practice that gets you further into the flow state and more understanding of metaphor, and then just continues
like
around.
A positive feedback loop with it. Pervasive and profound is that metaphor.
Yeah, and metaphors
constantly accessible.
And metaphors don't have to just be like verbal; they can also be artifacts, like the Dani, which was that fertility symbol that you saw. Or the carved bones on a stick, or the medallion
tracking the time
with the little with the maybe it's a squiggle that says I'm a part of this group, or I have this position within the group. You don't necessarily have to have words, but that squiggle on a stone is a metaphor for what the position in that group is, or what you do. So it's like metaphor doesn't have to be verbal or literary. Metaphor can literally be an artifact. Or even a meme of just pictures. Memes are metaphors that induce a memory. Memory meme.
Yep.
They're mimetic devices. And he makes a statement that I think is important and should be highlighted. The shaman weaves concepts together, enhancing cognition and altering states of consciousness, improving meaning making, and shamans are beneficial to communities, and he mentions, like one community with the shaman, one without the shaman. One with the shaman is could be much better off.
Much better. Yeah.
The shaman trains in giving him or herself themselves a higher perspective and a broader understanding of a wider array of complex information and patterns.
Yes, increased capacity to solve complex problems, and then that maps on to everyone around them. They're increasing those around them. The metaphorical enhancement and understanding of like time, like the shaman that's keeping track of time on the bone is showing and sharing with those around them. Like, oh yeah, we know that it floods when we've gotten to this mark over and over and over again, so we know when we're getting close to it. And so that's a powerful metaphorical piece of knowledge that's just right there, simply in etchings on a bone. Shamans were wizards of metaphorical enhancement,
and they were capable of soul flight or getting high.
Yeah,
and I like these metaphors that he brings up, because
making creative connections by getting that overview effect.
Yeah, like the song "Astronaut Eyes," one that I think last episode we opened with. That overview
American
effect.
Dharma.
But I like that word oversight. If you split
That's
it apart,
cool,
and supervision.
Supervision.
If you break that, it's like, supervision. That sounds like a desirable thing, but it's like, well, your supervisor has supervision over things. Everything's metaphor.
Yes, but being able to pull back and get that bird's eye view, that metaphor, the bird's eye view, that overview of something, to be able to understand a complex thing and how it interlinks. You can also, like, thinking of the Grand Canyon, like, you can see how great it is from above and get a sense of its vastness and the power of what caused it. You can also dive deep into it and get into the detail of the canyons themselves and look up and understand it And you had a metaphor about trees.
Oh,
Understanding.
to understand the tree, one must stand under the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with the one-isms. I've got quite a few one-isms. A good one-ism I like, maybe little advice in here is you should take in your life is I'd rather deal with a wolf knowing it's a wolf than a snake masquerading as a rope.
Oh my gosh.
It's a bunch of metaphor, but
It's a bunch
probably
in one.
yeah. Well, the wolf obviously something that'll eat you, but at least you know it's going to eat you. But hey, you're grabbing for that what you think's a rope to help you out of that pit, and it turns out it's a snake, and it bites you, and then well, you die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the most dangerous wolf is the one that disguises itself as a sheep metaphor wrapped up with the metaphor of.
I use a lot of snake imagery in my
Snake
tattoo.
in a rope.
I happen to be a
Zen
snake
koan.
in the Chinese zodiac. I'm a earth snake. We're a little bit more tame and less manipulative than, say, the fire snake or the wishy-washy air snakes. Yeah, snakes. Yeah, actually, I'm so tied.
Snake
a little side
personalities.
tangent, but I am so tied into it. It took a
Symbol of medicine.
very shaman.
Symbol of things that scare us too.
You know,
yeah.
Storm.
Mm-hmm.
So Storm's a shaman type person. He speaks through the trees, and I believe it. I've seen it. But he noticed that my mole pattern on my body is always in twos, and he was like, "Man, dude, you must have been thrown into a snake pit in your past life or something." I'm like, "Well, maybe, but you know,
That's
like,
funny.
well, it's snake energy is something to hold with you if you can. It is a knowledge symbol, and if
It's a symbol
if
of
most
wisdom
medicine
in
is
many
placebo
cultures.
effect, then
Yeah.
just the ability to know how to induce the placebo effect in other people is a very powerful medicine. So, and snakes are tricksters, so part of that is.
Well, they're very
tricking people.
stealthy, so they're also used as like a symbol of cunning. Yeah, and they're things that scare us because they're often poisonous. So we, depict them as evil sometimes.
Well,
But they have many different ways of being looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even in our ape brain, apes will still look at snakes and be like, "No!" And everybody will jump around and point at the snake and be like, "Ah!"
And they'll be fascinated and they'll sit and watch it for a while. He talks about that in a later episode.
So, and what
Yeah.
Jordan
Awe.
Peterson say, we're chimpanzees
State of awe.
filled with snakes. That's a good metaphor.
Yeah, right.
Chimpanzees filled
Yeah.
with snakes. Well, yeah, actually.
Or the lower field of our vision, accommodating being able to see snakes and things in camouflage, and so we increased our color definition and our pattern sensing in our vision.
Bit of a tangent, but it was a good one nonetheless.
No, yeah, it connects for sure. Yeah, those guys both taught at University of Toronto, and they've had some really interesting
Canadians
conversations
have
together.
come up with some pretty smart guys.
Funny guys
you
too,
know.
man. Talented people
Yeah.
up in grand old
I
Canada.
think we're about ready for the next part. And I think this is, our last part.
But I need to move forward now, because I want to talk about another revolution. This was the Upper Paleolithic transition. This is where the meaning-making machinery, the altering consciousness, the self-transcending, the flying above, the cultivation of wisdom, associated with a lot of things that we consider spiritual and religious. You see them all together. That's the Upper Paleolithic transition. Now there's another important revolution that takes place around 10,000 BCE. That's the Neolithic Revolution. You get the invention of agriculture. Now, agriculture is important because it adds to this machinery in an important way, because now individuals are part of complex societies. And for the first time, because of agriculture, people start to stay in one place for significant amounts of time. So their relationship to the environment, to each other, because they're living with large groups of strangers now, and to themselves, radically changes. That goes through a very long period of development. This world, right, of course, then becomes the ancient world, as stone gives way to metal. And we get the Bronze Age, the period of the first great civilizations in Mesopotamia, in Egypt. And there's a transformation that's happened in the way people are experiencing their world. human beings are still doing everything we've been talking about. They still have rituals. Of course, they've developed them into very sophisticated, complex systems. They're still engaging in altered states of consciousness. And that world is pervasive for a very long time. But our connection to it is very odd. So if I were to ask you if you've read anything from the Bronze Age, chances are you haven't. Have you read the Epic of Gilgamesh? Well, no, probably not. Right? Have you read any Egyptian mythology? Probably not. Why? The Sumerian, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian civilizations are titanically important, long-lasting. But notice if I ask you if you've read parts of the Bible, or perhaps Plato, or perhaps some of the Buddha or Confucius, chances are you have read some of that. You somehow feel that those people are relevant to you in a way that people from the Bronze Age aren't. Now why? There seems to have been another great change, comparable to the change of the Upper Paleolithic transition. Again, whether it's a one shot or more continuum, again, I don't need to decide that, and I'm not confident that the debates around that are actually very fruitful. But Carl Jaspers talked about the axial age. Karen Armstrong has made famous that in a recent book. So around 800 BCE, to around 300 BCE, there's this great change, such that you will read, connect to, find relevant authors, systems of thought, ways of being from that time period, and yet back here, where the Bronze Age ends, you don't read this stuff. In fact, or at least most of you don't. You don't find it relevant. You don't identify with it. Something happened here that is formative of us. Just like the Upper Paleolithic transition was formative of us as human beings, the Axial Age is formative of us as Western civilization, or at least world civilization, because it's not just in the West that the Axial Revolution occurs. It also occurs in India and China. Now, what happened? Why this change? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that happens. We don't quite know. There's a lot of discussion about it. But we know the Bronze Age collapses. There's some good books by this. There's a book by Drews. There's a book by Klein, 1177 BCE. Right? Different discussions about why it collapsed. Was it a change in chariot warfare? Is it general systems failure? Is it a combination of change in military technology? Don't know. Doesn't matter for our purposes. What we know is that it's a collapse. Now you need to grasp the gravity of this collapse. This is the greatest collapse in civilization the world has ever known. The fall of the Roman Empire is nowhere near as devastating as this. More cities go out of existence at this time, the Bronze Age collapse, than any other time in recorded history. More cultures disappear. Greatest loss of literacy, greatest collapse of trade and this is the closest thing the world has actually experienced to apocalypse, the end of the world. What happens here is a dark age. So you had, before this, you have these, like the Egyptian Empire, these titanic dinosaur empires, huge and powerful, lasting for centuries. cultures that last millennia, and then they disappear. And what you find, right, is something like when the dinosaurs went extinct. When the dinosaurs went extinct, the little mammals that had been sort of scurrying about, they start to evolve. What you have, once these dinosaur empires pass out of existence in the Dark Age, is you have a lot of little small-scale societies, people barely hanging on. It's a very tough time. Another time in which there's a demand made on cognition to adapt. Remember the bottleneck in Africa preceding the Upper Paleolithic transition? Here's another bottleneck kind of event. So people are more willing to experiment, to try new things than they have before in the past. They're willing to try new forms of social organization. But importantly, they start to invent new things. And they start to invent new psychotechnologies. Remember last time we talked about what a psychotechnology is. It's a standardized way of doing information processing that improves and enhances your cognition by linking brains together. Your brain to your own future states of your brain to other people's brains. Something happens here in one of the areas that was hit hardest by the Bronze Age collapse. The area, Palestine and what's modern Israel, and Jordan, places like that, used to be the old, referred to as the land of Canaan. What seems to be invented here is a new kind of literacy. Remember we talked about literacy as a powerful psychotechnology. Now the Bronze Age world had literacy. The Egyptians had hieroglyphics, famously. The Sumerians had cuneiform. Now the thing about those forms of literacy is they're very difficult to learn. You have to go to school for a very, very long time. And your job, you could have this job in the ancient world. This was your job, to be literate. It's called being a scribe. It's where we get words like scribble from. All you were, your entire job was you were literate, because it was a tough thing to be literate, and it was a very valuable thing, and it was a rare thing. Because literacy was hard when it's ideographic. So I have some ideograms tattooed here, right? This means meditate, right? What gets invented here is alphabetic literacy. Right? Sort of, it seems to be invented in Canaan, and then it's taken up by the Phoenicians, and then they take it to the Greeks. And then the Canaanite alphabet merges imperceptibly into archaic Hebrew and then gets taken into Hebrew. That's going to be important. These two groups of people are going to be very important. Now, why is alphabetic literacy so powerful? It's much more learnable. It's a more effective and efficient psychotechnology. Remember when I said last time how much literacy enhances your cognition? If I give you alphabetic literacy, you can learn it much more powerfully, and more people can learn it. So your ability to learn and access and share with others the benefits of literacy gets magnified tremendously. And so the amount of people, the number of people that can be literate expands. Now, literacy does something very, very important. Really, really interesting in its effect on your sense of self and your sense of cognition. As I noted before, when I can write things down, I can come back to my thoughts later and I can reflect on them. I start to become more aware of my own thoughts. And notice something else I can do. I can correct my thinking more readily, because I don't have to rely on it being held in my mind. I can put it, I can externalize it, I can put it out there, I can reflect on it, I can correct it. I can store it independent of my memory. I start to get a capacity for what Robert Bellah calls second-order thinking. Now, we all have metacognition. We'll talk about this later. Metacognition is your awareness of your own mind. I can ask you right now, what are you thinking? You can become aware of it. Do you have a good memory? Yes or no? And you'll say, I do or I don't. That's metacognition. It's your knowledge and awareness of your own mind. We all have metacognition. But one of the things you can do with literacy, alphabetic literacy, is you can internalize literacy into your metacognition. So notice I'm becoming aware of my own cognition here. I can reflect on it, I can correct it, I can enhance it, I can store it, I can share it with others. Second order thinking is when you internalize a psychotechnology into your metacognition and it improves your capacity to critically examine your own thinking and correct your own thinking. Second order thinking starts to emerge because of alphabetic literacy. What else is being invented at this time? Well, you've got lots of armies moving around in this period because what's happening is empires are being rebuilt, famously the Assyrian Empire in the Middle East. Mobile armies are needed. And so there's an invention here that's really important that we also take for granted, right? It's the stuff we carry around. Well, we used to carry it around. We don't carry it around anymore. We'll talk about that. It's money, coinage. Coinage is invented. Now, coinage is obviously a physical technology in one sense. I carry coins around, although the sense in which money is now physical is very, very tenuous, because most of us don't carry anything physical anymore. Money is just a purely symbolic thing. And that's the point. Money teaches you to think in an abstract symbol system. You start thinking in abstract symbol systems. And it also teaches you something else, numeracy. You have to start thinking mathematically, at least arithmetically. So you now have abstract, symbolic, logically rigorous thought being trained. It's being trained for practical purposes, but it's being trained. It's ready for exaptation. The alphabetic literacy is training this second order thinking. It's ready for exaptation. You say, okay, I get it. The psychotechnologies are training skills that are ready for acceptation. Well, bring that second order thinking and bring that abstract, symbolic thought, more logically rigorous together, and what are you going to start getting? You're going to start getting people having a very, clear sense of two things about their cognition. One thing is how much they can correct their cognition, how much they can transcend themselves, self-transcendence. It enhances their sense of self-transcendence. But what's it also doing? It's also enhancing their awareness of how self-deceptive they are, how much error is in their cognition, and they previously couldn't be aware of it, but now with second-order thinking, with literacy, and abstract symbolic thought and numeracy, they can become aware of this. Now you put those two together, a tremendous capacity for self-correction, a tremendous capacity for self-deception. And human beings start to do something very differently. They start to change their sense of self and their sense of the world. They start to realize a more personal sense of responsibility, which of course is going to change how people think morally about themselves. What do I mean? Let me give you a specific example. If you look before this time, people think of chaos and warfare and violence as just part of the natural order. But after the Axial Revolution, with the advent of second-order thinking, with this increased awareness of self-transcendence and self-correction, people start to realize, no. We're responsible for the violence. We're responsible for the chaos. Not just in some vague sense, but it's the way my mind makes meaning. That's why the Dhammapada begins, the mind is the chief thing. Right? People understand, they understand, and you see this in the Dhammapada, there is no enemy greater than your own mind, but there is no ally greater than your own mind. People start understanding this double-edged sword of their own cognition. Undisciplined leads to violence through self-deception and illusion. But discipline through self-correction and self-transcendence leads to wisdom and the ability to reduce the violence and the suffering. So in our next meeting together, we're going to talk more about this axial revolution and this sense that people had of their capacity for self-transcendence and their capacity for self-deception, and how that changed radically their sense of self and their sense of the world, and how that changed what meaning meant and what wisdom meant. Thank you for your time.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Pause it before it goes wild on us.
Yeah, before some commercial comes up and then we're advertising for things we don't want to.
No commercials. No commercials, thankfully. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us and enjoying this episode of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis with us. So the final thoughts on this episode, what did you take from it?
Well, so for this last bit, it's explained, and there was, yeah, and so we ended up we ended up being, because of agriculture, gathering in larger and larger and larger areas with more and more and more and more strangers, and that changed our awareness of ourselves opposed to others. And then let's see.
That was major.
And he mentioned also, it's like, how many people read the Epic of Gilgamesh and really get something out of it. So it seems like throughout time, these old meanings lose relevance.
Old narratives, old stories, and ways of teaching, basically moral lessons and ideas.
And sometimes it's not applicable because there was different challenges and different things going on at that period of time and different understandings on
different
how the world
cultures
works.
that are going to interpret things differently.
And now we're at this point where we can look back on what he's calling the Axial Age, about 800 to or 11 something to 300 BCE. And there was a cataclysm that happened.
Yeah,
that
between
really
800, 300, things changed drastically.
Wow.
There's like a dark age.
Yeah, well, we nearly got wiped off the
darkest
mat.
age. Yeah, multiple civilizations and cultures died off and then are long forgotten, and we just have small pieces of them left.
And the meek mountain peoples inherited.
Yeah, so we slowly started to put things back together, and it took a while. So the collapse and the dark age, the death of monolithic civilizations inherited by the meek, another bottleneck, creates new inventions and psychotechnologies.
It's like there's these moments of necessity that really spur our development with our psychotechnologies, and as well as our technologies. We went from bronze until eventually steel, which is just to make reliable steel is a process in and of itself that's way beyond making bronze.
Yeah.
Higher temperatures, oxygen-free environments,
It's a much more sophisticated process. And so we started to internalize, so we developed new forms of language and communication
so in
and writing.
Palestine, where he said where everything, was hit the hardest pretty much, and it's almost like the center of the bomb, or the ground zero. somehow came up with a new form of language, which is alphabetical, which is way easier.
Like a furnace, like
Yeah,
a situation where things...
A crucible that melted it all down.
For high level of development, because literacy started to pour out in alphabetic form.
Yeah,
which was much easier to learn.
Yeah, imagine
and to
having
teach
to learn
and to spread, and so then you didn't have to have these scribes that were dedicated just to understand all these many hieroglyphs. You now could teach to very many people, and with that literacy, we then begin to internalize the literacy as part of our metacognition.
Yeah.
And we started to think in terms of language. We started to be able to hold more complex concepts in our head and to write them down so that we could reflect on them.
Yeah, and that's that second order thinking that he brought up, being able to...
And then with coinage, we developed arithmetic, mathematics, a sense of numbers and accuracy and measurement. And that really refined our thinking to become more logical and self-reflective, but that was a double-edged sword.
Yeah, sure. Well, because then you can see you bullshitting yourself,
Yes, so we can very effectively bullshit ourselves now.
And I guess we as a species moved beyond the universe is just lions and tigers and bear oh my, and all the violence is just that. Well, it's actually, now as a species, we're realizing that, this violence and these things that are happening are a result of my actions and my thoughts personally, and this is happening broadly across all of humanity.
Our effects in much more complex ways. We were able to see things much more clearly and accurately, and we started to reflect on our own self-responsibility and develop systems of morality.
Well, you can see the perceptions of
that went much deeper than they had previously.
Changed,
right.
Whereas, at first, it's just
that makes sense.
The weather, nature, everything ripping it apart.
Ruthlessly neutral,
and then God
willing to destroy,
and
sense of nature.
And then,
or that you felt being judged for something that maybe had been done that was really bad in the society, and then some massive storm or flood comes, and we start connecting things.
Well, so, those ideas, I think...
So that was Bronze Age versus, this much more refined sense. Like, the gods were very much...
Well, they were still in the early stages of this, before the true understanding that your thoughts and actions have repercussions. The gods were the neutral thing, but then once we start developing that, this idea that our thoughts and actions are causing this violence, well, then there's a punishment aspect to it. It's then we're being punished.
So you had forces of nature,
but then the next step is we're being
spirits of emotions and things. But then we came up with this idea of transcendent love, a love even greater than our own parents, like the ultimate parent love of all the creator's love.
Well, and I think that's the pinnacle of the Axial Revolution. Not the beginning of what had happened, but what it really led to. And you can tie this up to the birth of Christianity or Christ. Christ was the usher in of the new concept of you're at one with God, or you can be, at least if you follow the way. And it's a loving,
it's a way of unconditionality.
God.
Yeah, pure love. Yeah, turn the other cheek, love your neighbors.
Even the anger
or
in it,
enemy as you would your neighbor.
So it's just interesting to see how religions over time, as well as our collective psychology,
I said that
grows,
love your
adjusts.
enemy and your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
And that that actually got into what he was saying about the mind is your greatest enemy, but also your greatest ally as well. It's just externalized.
But of course, these things get co-opted, institutionalized, organized, misunderstood,
well, it's also cyclical. Nothing stays perfect and pristine.
We forget some of the old metaphors because we're no longer in that cultural context of that time. So, and then we start to take things literally as well, and forget that there's also deep metaphor interwoven with some of these accounts of perhaps actual experience in situations in some cases.
Yeah.
But it depends on how far you want to go with it. Was there really a talking snake and so forth? But was there a great flood? It seems like there actually was a great flood.
It seems like every religion on the planet either has a flood story or a massive fire story.
Yeah,
Graham Hancock was right. Something big hit us about 12,500 years ago and really put a not just a cultural scar, but like a special scar that really scarred our species to 12,500 years ago was way before the Axial Revolution, but not so far back. We're talking 40,000 years for, getting into what would eventually set up the Bronze Age. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of memory.
Could have been a couple of them.
Oh, yeah. No, I think the space rocks hitting us and really causing problems is probably more common than we think. Just most of them hit in the ocean, and we just
there's fields that are where there's more space rocks.
Yeah.
And when you go through that field, you might actually see a few come through in the span of 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 years. We haven't seen one in a while. that was big enough to cause massive damage around the world.
We've had a few
put the
just
world in
barely miss
darkness
us,
and
though.
drastically
So
changes the weather, but we know that has happened. We know that has happened and caused massive worldwide extinction.
yeah,
And that's I think that's important to remember. There we are flying around in space, and yeah, I mean humans can be seen as a cancer. I think we talked about this a little bit last time.
maybe not.
But
last
we could
time,
also
but
be seen
yeah.
as Earthlings. I know I talk about this on the podcast itself a lot. If we see ourselves as extensions of Earth, as Earthlings, rather than as separate from, we realize that she grew us, and we being outgrowth, self-reflective extensions of her, not being separate at all, can grow into being the great stewards that we have this great potential to be, it seems. And so by recognizing that sense of interconnection.
And it seems like now we're at another bottleneck, and it's maybe not necessarily like a bottleneck of like population numbers or civilization collapsing, but a bottleneck of information and different ways of knowing,
Different ways of
belief
knowing all
structures.
coming into like basically accentuates each other ultimately, but we are in a state of clashing right now as these cultures
we're in a
increasingly
state of
fast are
limiting
getting
right
to know
now.
one another around the world due to our increased access to technology
You,
and the
you
spread
better
of
believe
content
it.
and media
We're being throttled and
telecommunications.
choked out because the information got too big and people got scared.
It's
Because we have too
overwhelming the
much.
amount of information we're getting right now,
And
but it's also part of us getting to know each other really, really fast around the world. All these different cultures and their deep mysteries and deep wisdom behind them all. Where they're starting to not only clash but intermingle and interweave with one another, and so we just got to continue.
Well, that's the hopeful thing, because not to
holding
be a
the boat
pessimist,
steady.
but
Yeah.
instead of
Well, we
something
have to
bad
be
happening that's
hopeful so
throttling
we can
us
put
down,
ourselves in the
we're
orientation of
throttling.
solving it. Yeah.
Well, but dude, I got to really bring this up. I'm going to be about this, but the throttling and extinction event that we're dealing with is the extinction of independent thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening right now. Don't you dare think outside the box.
Yeah.
Don't you dare do that, because you'll
That's
be
starting to
chastised,
happen, isn't it?
ostracized,
Yeah.
thrown out. You'll be cut off from what it is to be alive, and this is the challenge.
There's certain
this is
narratives
the bottleneck that is
you have to
forcing
support
us to get past.
to be in with certain groups. And what if we orient ourselves according to that which we all agree on the most? Love.
Yeah.
Love itself. That we all cherish love. We all cherish belonging, and that meaningfulness that comes with loving an experience, loving something that you can get in the flow state with, but loving somebody and our family members and our friends and one another. So when I speak of interconnection, not just with the planet, but with one another. And I think that realization that has been spoken of by all the great wisdom schools of the many traditions around the world are able to now come together in concert, and we can play these things together and find where they resonate, and we can find these deep truths that transcend all cultures, that are part of something deep rooted and at the heart of who we are as humans, and how we can best relate with the cosmos, with the earth, with one another. And so we're in a choke point, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we have to upgrade our sense-making capacity now to another level.
Yeah,
this is I can't think of no better orientation to this than love. That's why I speak of love, and I don't speak of that weak, sentimental idea of love. As Martin Luther King said, that sentimental bosh. I speak of the great unifying force that all the great religions of the world have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life, love. And so to see that there could be this transcendent ideal
well, love could
that
be,
we can all rally around.
You could call love the ultimate meaning, because like when kids will ask why, why is the universe like that? Oh, because of love.
That's
and
a good
I'm
answer.
kind of being a little
but
snarky
why does
with
a
it,
kid care about something a lot? Because they love it.
Yeah.
I love this. I want this. I love, especially when they really get into something.
Yeah,
they genuinely do love it.
Yeah, well, perhaps there's something to the idea that love is the truest meaning we can really get a grasp on as far as these fleshy creatures that we are.
Well, it's the optimal mode of being for us to be able to interact with our environments, for sure, and with one another.
Love could put
as
you in a
social,
flow state
as
too.
social animals, Well, it does, When you love something and you're free into the expression, you're well trained in it because you spend a lot of time in it because you love it. You're passionate about it. Sure, it's easier to create on the spot. It's easier to be in that flow state, And that's a powerful capacity for us as humans to be able to encourage and engender right now, because we have gigantic, monumental problems facing us, and a bottleneck that we must try and get through. I feel as adults in this time and age, how do we approach the world as it is today to help make it as good as possible for those that come after us? That's the highest responsibility, and to be good stewards of this living planet, this miracle of a planet that is so precious and so special and so rare.
My mom did a good job of making us. It'd be a shame to destroy what she made.
Yeah, and we're the only things that can stop the asteroids. We actually have the technology to stop the asteroids from killing the miracle
or we have the
of life
technology
on this planet.
to eventually get
There's
to
something
stopping
good
it.
for us to do together. Yeah, and to be able to use this crazy technology of exploding shit besides each other.
So much good things for us to do. We've just kind of, I don't know if we've forgotten it, or maybe really never gotten to grasping how much actual good there is for us to do.
This is a thing that some cultures seem to have grasped to some degree, of maintaining a high level of peace for long periods of time. It's
that's one thing. With all of our problems in the West, Western culture has done a pretty damn good job
Nepal and
as far as their
India,
legal system and ethics systems of establishing a lot more peace than what we've had probably in most of humanity.
And ingenuity and creativity and great problem solving capacity, so we can really thrive rather than just scrambling to survive.
We actually have leisure time, which allows us to do things like this.
We have the technology to become more symbiotic with this planet. Save the ocean, save the soil,
reuse what you can.
Grow healthier food. Give the power back to the farmers rather than these giant agribusinesses that are effectively poisoning the planet,
or huge conglomerates of whatever, the WEF folks and all them that are telling governments to tell their people that they can't use, I don't know, fertilizers or this, that, or the other. You need to cut down on this, that, or the other. It's like we're at the point where you can actually see the thing that's throttling
that's
us.
the thing that took out the last few farmers, and there should be a transitory period where we are phasing out of the thing. The thing is, right now, Sadhguru was on Joe Rogan talking about this, and he's a huge advocate of protecting farmers and food for people. And what's the name of her beautiful woman that was also on Russell Brand? That's someone I've seen over the years talking on protecting the farmers in the world, and India, where she's from. Right now, if we stop using pesticides, which suck, and I try and avoid, but if we stopped using them, then we would have like a third or less, like 30% of the food that we have right now. We have to begin the transition, but we have to empower farmers to be able to survive while they do it, because they're trying to compete with giant agribusiness companies that use crazy amounts of pesticides and are outselling because they can outprice things.
Sure.
And we've seen the farmer get killed off for the last 100 years. We used to all get all of our food from local farmers and from our own gardens, and we've ceased doing that. We buy it from grocery stores now, but we've lost the nutritional value that we need, and the flavor and the taste and the health of the soil as well with these crazy farming techniques, and then of course the lungs of the earth with the Amazon rainforest and so forth. And so these are things I think that whether you're on the left or the right of the spectrum or independent, that we can all agree on, that we can be better stewards. We can stop spilling toxins at a rate that's faster than our earth can clean itself up. We can start to live in a higher state of symbiosis with one another. We can start putting our minds together to solve these great problems that face us as a species.
It all at once.
Rather than demonizing one another and looking through these low resolution labels at one another. Lots of yes.
Not to be well, I don't want to get like all doom and gloom, so I'm kind of holding my tongue because I could rant, but that's not the focus of this episode.
No, I feel you.
In other episodes we'll get more into that, but so
I like to contrast it with the light. There has to be something that we can do and hope, rather than just a naive expectation. It can be something actionable that we can create in this world. And by putting our minds together, we can enact dialogos and develop higher order sense-making capacity by literally networking our brains to figure out how we may approach the myriad existential crises facing our species in this great time of transition.
In this grand meaning crisis.
Yeah, the meaning crisis being at the root of the many myriad crises. If we can solve the meaning crisis, then we have a good chance of facing down the other potential dangers.
Or if we can at least start to, set up the foundation and framework for the next generations to have something solid to work off of, too. Because things take time. They take generations.
They do. They do.
It didn't happen instantly that we got ourselves in this crappy situation.
No.
It took time. And we can actively push back against these things that are aiming to bottleneck us and choke us out without having to use their own tactics. We can use our own. We can make our own sense, our own meaning, and that scares them. Mm-hmm. Who is they? You know who they is. I'll know who they is.
Greedy people that want to enact
I don't want to
control
name names because I don't want this thing taken
themselves.
off, but you know who they is.
The ones that don't believe in the idea of people having a system of self-governance, that want to influence us, that would use divide and conquer methodology to divide us and to further enrich themselves.
Yeah. So what we have here is something to prep ourselves and fortify our defenses against whatever this huge thing is that's trying to gobble us up, which is just ourselves, really.
It's the nothing.
Yeah. Well, nothing is terrifying, dude.
Most
terrifying nothing
Such
is.
a powerful lesson, though, man. I mean, it's, why when the wolf is telling Atreyu why it's there, it's like because you all have stopped imagining. And so
there's
it's
this
destroying Fantasia.
Imagining, imaging, creating images. Oh, man.
Story making, powerful story making narratives by which. So that's what we need, a new narrative for the whole world to rally around together. Now that we're all getting to know one another.
Yeah, right. Strangers being a little less strange or a little more strange.
Yeah, Yeah, we have higher resolution so we can catch each other's body language a little bit better through live streams. So there's a little bit better communication in the telephone and the radio, and things continue to ratchet up. I mean, the way that you can make a documentary or a film to write a story.
Sure.
Books are still probably the best because they really get the imagination going.
And if you make the right kind of book and keep it in the right circumstances, you can store information for a very long time.
Yeah, they're all awesome. I mean, the visual arts, movies are amazing because it's like the combination of so many arts together: music and acting and writing and cinematography and lighting and so on and so forth. But yeah. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, for joining us on this episode. I know we're probably eking in on 2 hours here.
Looks like
little over. Wow, yeah, this was a long one, but
we got to rambling.
Hey, if you enjoyed the rambles, then thank you for being a part of it and helping inspire this situation. And look forward to future episodes coming up every week. I'm going to be trying to do them around 7 or 8 o'clock in the evenings. I'll always let you guys know what time we're looking at each day, and you can. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, on Twitch, on Facebook, on your podcast network where you're listening to this show to help it reach more people, help us grow. And I would love to be able to continue doing this. And living the life of a starving artist is what it is. We gotta get good nutrition for our bodies so that we can continue to make it through Vervaeke's awakening from the meaning crisis.
I actually got some soup that I've been thinking about since we started.
They always say, don't talk politics on an empty stomach.
Oh, that is very true.
Yeah.
That is very true. You'll get hangry.
Yeah, take care of that sense of hunger in the body because the sense of survival being peaked puts us in a certain mode.
Yeah.
It's easier to fall into a certain mode.
Ravenous wolves we are when we're hungry.
Yeah. Well, we've come a long way, that's for sure. We've gone from extremely tribal and territorial primates to these kind of aquatic apes that can swim and hold our breath underwater, but also have this capacity for intentionally deep socialization and appreciation, and we can get along with strangers. That's the rare thing we talked about last episode.
That still blows my mind thinking about the fact how often we get along with perfect. You hurl yourself down the street in thousands of pounds of steel next to perfect strangers, and you all just trust that.
And the dogs that we've tamed from wolves are like took on the very best aspects of us. They're unconditionally loving at all times, so loyal. So true, and they never hold a grudge against you. And as long as you give them love, they become the most loving.
I don't know. I've met a few dogs that have definitely held some grudges, but they're usually the little shitty ones. They look
Those guys are funny.
It's like, Or huskies.
Yeah.
Huskies will hold a grudge.
They got to know how to like stay wary of larger beings that bully them. Maybe that's why they got a different kind of
or you just
memory
irritated them and they're old
going
and
on.
crotchety and they're just like, oh, you do the thing I don't like. I don't know if that's necessarily a grudge.
The personality of small dogs.
Yeah, you gotta love them anyway. It's just like, you're just ugly and old. Look at you.
A little Napoleon complex.
Yeah. Right. I'm big. Okay, you're big. Get out of here. Get out of my face.
Man, we got you.
Get out of my knees. Oh boy. Okay. Well.
Yeah, it's more the high pitchedness of the bark than the depth and the power of the bark that they're utilizing. That's for sure.
All right. On that.
All right, guys. Yeah. So keep your doggies happy and fed. Keep your stomachs and hearts and souls happy and fed.
Look out for those around you that you love.
Yes, if you're looking for a legal way to microdose DMT, check out my episode. There's 2 episodes. You'll have to look through. I forget the exact episode numbers. Maybe 34, somewhere thereabouts, was my first episode of Wim Hof breathing, where there's a Wim Hof guided tutorial. Breathing technique that helps decrease inflammation and release endogenous healthy hormones and chemicals in the body that boost your immune system, increase capacity for flow state, really still the mind. It really sets you up beautifully for meditation. I love to do it before meditation. So in this episode, both of them that I've shared, one of the other ones in the 40s, is also have guided meditations built into them. And I encourage you guys to join these shared meditations and get that feel for this stillness that is behind all things at all times, that we can tap into at any time, because this will help us flow. This will help us cultivate inner peace and help share that with others as well. And every little bit that we can help lighten the world, I think, is helpful. There's enough negativity that's being added to it right now, and so just some genuine love out there.
Yeah.
And love is the doorway to wisdom.
And if you haven't heard it today, I love you.
Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Actuali Podcast. Stay tuned next week for episode 3. Check out American Dharma Band.
Yeah.
Check out all the music, Infusion. Check out Imaginary Man. You can check out the Greater Than One project. And so much more that we got going on. We even got Bitchy Game Bros going on with my little brother Rhino. And so look forward. Join us on these adventures and journeys. And let's make the media our own again. And I think I'm done blabbing for the night.
Yeah.
We out.